Welcome to this Master the Workflow lesson on rotoscoping. I want to show you a quick technique for roto that can help speed up your work and also get around a common problem. So let's get started. In this shot, we have a two-shot of our two actresses in this car. But you know what? The director likes the performance of this actress in an earlier take. I've pre-selected that early take. And let me go to a source record view. I'm going to load that shot in. I've just subclipped this out earlier. And I'm going to cut it over the top. So I have my shape. And I'm going to go into an effects view here. And let's just animate this real quick. I'm going to drag this animate effect over the top here. I'm going to draw my shape. And I'm going to just kind of work my way around. Get the rear view mirror, maybe the top of the car here. I'm just following the lines so that I have a clear seam. You can hide the edges better if you cut along them. And then I'm going to just reposition that. So I'm going to drag the 3D warp effect on here, and I'm going to option drag it. And Avid likes to give you this error sometimes. And I'm just gonna, why? Wait a minute, it's moving both layers. I hate that. I bet you do too. This is a common issue. And the good news is, there's a way to get around this. So I'm gonna show you how to get around this. And before we get too far into this, I just want to explain to you what we're gonna be doing in principle. We're going to be creating a matte and fill based on our roto, and then we're going to be using the matte key effect, and that will allow us to move this layer independent. So let's go one step back. I'm going to remove this 3D warp effect, and I'll keep this roto because that'll be handy. I'm going to drag this above. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut that same effect in underneath. So this is the exact same shot. This is that selected take that the director likes. You can see underneath, here's our original plate. So we have our roto. In fact, I'll solo it. You can see there's our roto work. Let's just go one step back so you can see this from the beginning. You can see we have dupe detection is telling me that this is the exact same shot. So let's go back into effects mode. Fortunately, that was not a very complicated roto, so I will just recreate it real quick, drag it onto the top layer, and again, just work my way around that shape, get that rear view mirror in there, up among these lines. Oh, that's not what I want to do, but I can still salvage it. There's my shape. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click this, and that expands it. In order to convert this into a matte and fill, we're going to use the paint effect. So I'm going to type paint in here, and you can see as I've expanded this, you see the plate represented here. I'm going to drag the paint effect into this top layer here. I'm going to select square around the entirety of this frame, and by default it turns red. And make sure you're not accidentally adjusting the magic mask. That is not what you want to address. You want to address the color. Let's bring down the saturation. Let's bring down the luminance, and that turns black. And I'm going to grab this icon and drag that over the blank space here. I'll make sure that I'm only selecting 1.1. Select this space again, which is the square we drew, and I'm going to make that white. Now I'm going to close this expansion, and if you've never used the matte key effect, this is going to take advantage of that. I'm going to option drag that over the top effect. You can see there's only the Animatte there. And now we're kind of back to where we were before with the Animatte, but I have these parameters within the matte key. I'm just going to take my vertical position, and now you can see I'm moving that layer independently. I'm going to move that horizontally a little bit. See, the eye is going to be in there, so I'll get that over. Maybe move it up a little bit. And the nice thing is, I can also readjust that matte after the fact. You can see little bits of the matte are visible there. I don't really like that, so I want to fix that. I'm going to open this back up. I'm going to go into effects mode, and let's just fix this matte. So I'm going to go to the reshape tool. I'll add a new shape there. Maybe drag that down. Now we're getting it all cleaned up. And you can see we have a little bit of a ridge here because this was moved over. But that looks pretty good. And what I'm going to do now is I will use the 3D warp tool, because in this case I do want to move both layers, and I'm going to use this because I want to get rid of that little edge there. I still want to preserve the performance here because, again, I like the performance of this actress on this side from this earlier take, but I also want to preserve the performance of this actress from take 5, but I don't want that seam. So on the 3D warp effect applied to filler over the top of these, I'm just going to bump this up a little bit. And you can see I'm monitoring the lower track, so make sure I'm monitoring correctly. And I'll just move that position over. And now the seam is gone. And especially when I turn on our mask, we now have this shot. Now you can see this is a handheld shot, so it's not perfect. It's mostly still. But that wasn't the point of this lesson. I'm going to show you how to deal with this. Also, as a final step, you have a lot of layers here, so you might want to talk to your editor as to how they want this delivered back to you. But what I typically do is I will actually clip out all of these. I'll add a little add edit there. Drag these up. I like to preserve the original plate underneath here. And then I will select all of these and just collapse them. And now I have my effect. If I need to get into that, I can just open that submaster. There's my matte key effect. I can work on my matte again if I'm just not happy with it. Maybe I want to select that and add a little horizontal feathering to that because it just doesn't seem to be blending right. You have a lot of control. And here's another great thing about working with the matte key is it seems to have fairly limited scaling and position keyframes, but if you promote it to 3D, you now have all of the parameters that the 3D warp effect has. You could motion track this. This is great if you're doing a TV monitor comp. For example, if you're doing a panning shot and there's a TV in the background, you can motion track this. The only difference is instead of drawing a shape in the Animatte tool that is based on this side of the frame, you draw a square shape and you can mount that into television. A very good way of working. Now, you can see in this case, this is a fairly simple shot. Again, it's not locked off, but it's pretty close. So this is a fairly tame example. I'm going to give you a slightly more complicated example, and this will also show you how you can work with shots with either speed effects or, in this case, stabilization. So let's go to example number 2. Here's a shot. We have our two actresses sitting at the table, but we really like her performance here. She's sort of staring with contempt at her co-star. It's a great performance. But this was from a specific part in the scene where she's going to point at somebody off frame. But we don't want that. We just want this to be a tense moment between the two of them. So, we've pre-selected this shot. We can see she's just sitting there, eating her food, not looking up, and this is a very handheld shot. There's a lot of motion here. So I'm going to cut this over the top, because we're going to start. Our director wants to preserve this performance, and that's fine. However, we don't want to simply stabilize this shot, because the director likes the handheld look. So we want to preserve that. So I'm going to show you how to preserve that. Here's the original plate. It's not too crazy, but it's definitely handheld. Now you have two stabilize effects that are built into the Avid. You have stabilize, which is a real-time effect, and you have region stabilize, which is not. I found that stabilize works in most situations, but it has a tendency to really more smooth out motion than prevent it outright. Region stabilize will usually do a better job completely stabilizing your shot to the point of stillness. However, it is not a real-time effect. You have to render it, and it does take longer. But I'll show you how we're going to utilize both of these effects right now. Right now, I'm just going to stabilize the lower plate using the stabilize effect. I'm going to drag it on there, and it's blocking the view so you can't actually see it working, but it's working. It's going frame by frame, stabilizing that shot. I'm going to go into my effects view. And you can see if we look at this shot, it's more or less smoothed out. There's definitely still motion there, but it's better than it was. So I'm going to drag this here, and we're going to save that. That'll be important later. Let's do what we intended to do and stabilize this shot. So I'm going to drag the region stabilize effect onto there. I'm going to enable auto zoom. Auto zoom, what this is going to do is it's going to make sure my shot remains within the full frame and zoom in as necessary. Then I'm going to drag this region of interest. I'm going to pull it out. Fortunately, we have these doors which are good and contrasty. In fact, I might even expand it into this light here because that'll just help us stabilize a little bit more. It'll take a little bit longer, but it'll give us a better stabilization. So again, I have to render this effect, so I'll click on that button and I'll let this render. And it's going to take a minute, but that's okay. And now you can see the shot got slightly blown up. That accounts for the auto zoom. But if I play it, that did a pretty good job. That shot is really not moving. Now I'm going to apply that region stabilize. To the top layer. Region stabilize. Make sure I'm monitoring the top layer. Let's enable auto zoom and drag our region of interest out. Let's include those doors and that light. And let's render that. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to cheat. I'm going to hit T to select that whole clip, and I'm going to hit Option C to load that as a sub, and I'm going to cut it over the top. So now, just like in the last example, I have this shot exactly the same, cut over the top of itself. So we're ready to animate. Now the difference is, before, where I had no effect, I was able to just drag the Animatte. This time, I need to option drag it. So I'm going to option drag Animatte. Now again, as we mentioned, whether you have a speed effect, or in this case a stabilize, this is going to work, but you want to apply that work first. It's very much an order of operations. So I'm going to turn on our poly tool, and I'm just going to draw the shape up that bar. I'm going to use the chair because that way I can use the arch of this to make sure I've got a match when I line everything up. And maybe I'll go along this line here, just have a little seam. There's my shape. Now let's convert this to a matte. So I'm going to double click this. And again, unlike last time where this was blank, you now see there is the effect icon. That's because this is a nested effect. There's a stabilize on there. So when I drag the paint effect onto this top layer, I'm actually going to option drag it. Option drag right there. Select 1.2. I'm going to draw a square over the entire frame, and I'm going to turn saturation down, luminance down, and we have a black frame. I'm going to drag that over the blank space underneath here. Select that, bring luminance up, and now I have my white frame. And I'm going to get that matte key effect. I'm going to option drag that. Now, that position is going to take a little bit of work, but that's fine. Bring it down, line it up a little bit. You can see I'm looking at this line here. I have a little bit of matte cleanup, but that's not going to be hard. Select the shape. Then I'll hit the reshape tool, drag this just underneath that matte. I want to keep that light, maybe blend it a little bit horizontally. And you can see with the light there, I'm not perfect. So I'll select this and move it over horizontally, just a touch. Still not perfect. Vertically a little bit. And I'm watching the table here, making sure that's lined up, but the door seems like it's a little low. So I'll just kind of split the difference here. Now you can see it's not perfect here. But these shots are pretty stable. Now you will notice sometimes the stabilization does not get it perfectly stable, and you'll have a little bit of washiness across the two sides. And this is a situation where you can go back and restabilize these, try to find a better point. For the sake of this example, again, it's swimming a little bit, but it's not the end of the world. Because realistically, we just want to make sure we can blend these takes, make sure it's something that's watchable, it's palatable. We're going to send this off to a vendor to do a better job than we can. Again, I can promote this to 3D if I need to motion track this plate. Turn on my mask. And let's just have a quick look. Now there's one more step we need to do. The director wanted that hand motion look. Now, being that the stabilize effect is going to take the motion and apply reciprocal motion to a shot to keep it from moving, to stabilize it. If you apply a stabilize effect to a shot that's not moving, you're essentially going to put that reciprocal motion onto it and give it the look of handheld. So I'm going to drag that over the top here. And you can even see that handheld motion masks the swimminess of the two sides of the plate. So we've given the director back what he wants. He wants that handheld motion, and we've hidden the fact that the stabilization here was not perfect. And that is a passable temp comp. Again, this is a lot of layers, so I'll just take all of these. I'll select them with the T key and I'll collapse them. And in fact, again, I always like the plate to be visible, so I'm just going to pull the plate out of here and I'll show you how not to do it. Do not select this with the red arrow and drag this out. That can cause problems with your collapses. Instead, I'll hit the T to select into out. I'll hit Option C, and then I'll just map this underneath. That's my plate. Cut it underneath, and again, I don't need the effect because the effect is in the collapse. I just want to preserve the plate. This will be important when I turn it over to online later, and I'll keep my temp comp on top of it. And we have a temp comp. Since Roto is really going to be at the heart of most of your temp visual effects, this is a great technique that you can use to move another layer on top of a layer without moving the both of them with the 3D warp effect. And you can see now there are circumstances when the 3D warp effect moving both layers is really helpful, but sometimes it isn't. So now you can work with those where you need it, and you can move those plates independently where you don't. I hope you enjoyed this lesson. I'm Richard Sanchez with Master the Workflow.